To answer these questions, we have Frank Wolf, Chief Strategy Officer of Staffbase. Frank has done extensive research about how companies formulate stories and narratives. In fact, Frank spent more than a year researching how a powerful narrative can truly shape the world. His insights are a useful guide for communicators and business leaders alike. So let's hear it from Frank.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm really excited to talk about the narrative age and why we think it's now. And I want to start with explaining why narratives are so powerful for communications. And I want to start with a question that I brought for you. When was the last time you changed your mind about something? It could be a small thing, like you watched a movie and you were actually surprised that you really liked it. It could be bigger things like you decided to buy a new car or move to another city or move jobs even. All of this is really hard. We have to think about this, we have pros and cons, and it takes us time. But what's even harder is not to change your mind, but to make other people's change your mind. And that's what communications is all about. That's at the core of our job descriptions. It's changing hearts and minds of your audience. And this could be a strategic project like a new strategy or a vision and mission statement that you want to align employees behind, or a big transformation project. It could be convincing outside talent to join your company, or it could be convincing customers to try a new product or services that you're launching. And many people, especially the ones who are not communicators, they might say, well, what's so hard about it? Well, after all, tell your story, say your message, and people will do what you want. But that's not the case. And we all know why. It's not what you say, it's what people hear that really matters. And this is where we enter the territory of narratives, because we say and we send stories and messages. But what really matters is what's happening in the mind of our audience. How does the message resonate with what they've seen before, with their beliefs, with their culture they've been grown up with? And that's all about narrative research. And that's what's so interesting. And I believe that's the difference between effective and ineffective communications, understanding how something will resonate with your audience. Here are the 3 points we want to discuss in my presentation. First, what is a narrative and why is this more powerful than a story? I'll use an example of the Barbie movie and how I changed my mind about it. The second point that I want to discuss is how can you create messages that resonate with the narrative map of your audience? We will use the example of a very amazing and exciting industry about this, which is the space travel industry. And my third point today will be about 3 ideas how you can use this in your day-to-day work to help you with your communication. So let's start with what is a narrative and why does it matter? And when I started to research, I found that a lot of narrative definitions are out there. And to be honest, I found most of them very confusing, like the one here in Merriam-Webster. Typically, it talks about narratives are some sort of a reflection on series of events and so on. And it was really hard to find out what's really behind a narrative. And one definition that I found that I really liked was this one. Narratives are patterns that emerge from stories. This means stories are the individual pieces that are collected and gathered over time. And in our mind, a narrative is created about these stories. And the narrative is the big puzzle, is the big picture that emerges. And if you think that's still a bit abstract, then let's look at an example and let's look at the Barbie movie. And when I first heard about the movie, I thought that I'm never going to watch this. I go to the cinema just a few times every year. And before I do this, I do a lot of research about the movie and if I actually should go. And for this one, I decided not interested and not the kind of movie I really want to watch. And then I found a positive online review, which was really surprising. And they said the movie has sort of a plot that's really surprising, and it's different that something you would expect it to be. The second thing was friends of mine and my daughter went to the movie, and they came back. They were really excited. And my daughter said, "Dad, you won't believe it. It's not what you think as a movie. You should go and see it yourself." I wasn't convinced yet, but it was interesting. And sort of my narrative started to shift. Third, I heard all about the box office records that Barbie has done. I think Barbie is now around like 1.5 billion and more in box office revenue, one of the most successful movies ever. And this is a good indicator for people really liking it and recommending the movie to others. The final piece was a podcast. I regularly hear a stock podcast that I really like. And one of the hosts is, I think, a man about my age. And he said, I watched it and I really liked it. And he recommended to go. And at that point, I decided I need to see it myself. So what happened here? What happened is all these stories, step by step, as individual pieces, created a narrative in my mind. And the narrative they created could be in different forms, but I would describe it as the Barbie movie isn't what you think it is, and it might be worth watching. And based on this example, what we can do now is go a bit deeper into the differences between stories and narratives. And for stories, a lot of the strengths of stories is something we all know as communicators. Stories grab our attention because we have a hero, something happens to the hero, there's a challenge that the hero needs to overcome, right? This also creates emotion because we care once we know the hero and we hope nothing bad will happen to him or her. This also creates credibility because inside a story, we can go in all the details and we tell something. Take the box office revenues. That's details that really show how the movie performs and are really credible to me. And the last point, stories can be from very different sources, different heroes, different things happening. And this creates a big, wide diversity for a topic, which is great. All these stories together, as I said, create narratives. And narratives have a few specific strengths. Number one is they're the basis for action. My decision to actually go to Barbie was based on a narrative. And other things like buying a car, joining a company, are all based on a narrative. The second one is narratives are inclusive. While stories are about other people, what happened to them, narratives are about us. I can join a narrative like a movement. My daughter can be a great storyteller. She can tell me that this movie was great and she liked it, but it's still her story. But the narrative that I could go myself, see it and join the movement is something that makes narratives so powerful. The third one is how we share our point of view. If somebody asks me, how did you like the Barbie movie? I will first share my narrative, and then I might share a few stories about this. But we share usually first the narrative that we have about the topic. Number 4, narratives create framing and a confirmation bias. Once I have a narrative in my mind, I want to confirm it. This means I look out for new information, other stories which align with my existing narrative. And I even frame stories that I hear towards this narrative. So once I have a narrative in my mind, it actually gets pretty hard to change it over time. Narratives grow stronger with every story. As we hear more stories, they keep confirming this narrative. That's why a narrative is more convincing after all than an individual story. So whenever you want to change the mind of somebody, you should not tell an individual story, but you should aim to build a narrative. The last point is measurement. And we all know measurement is a huge topic for communicators. And we want to move from the pure output topics of I've written so many articles or I got so many likes to something that shows business impact. And that's great about narratives because as they are in people's minds, we can actually ask for them. We can ask, how likely are you to attend the Barbie movie? Or how did you like the Barbie movie? And that's something we can also measure time and time again. As you have a change program, you can measure over time if the buy-in of your employees, for instance, will rise to a specific narrative like, I believe this change program is a great idea for the future of our company. So all of this hopefully shows that narratives are a very powerful way to think about changing your audience's mind. And as a second step, I'd like to talk about how the messages that you create should and could resonate with the narrative map of your audience. And I want to start with an insight. And the insight is, of course, I have like hundreds or thousands of narratives in my mind, not just the one about the Barbie movie, but everything else. And every new message, every new story that I hear will be something that needs to resonate with my existing narrative map. And the idea and the concept of a narrative map is very powerful for communications to better understand their audience. To understand this better, let's look at a concrete example and look at an industry that I'm really excited about. It's private space travel. And here we have two companies founded by two billionaires. On the one hand, Blue Origin, founded by Jeff Bezos, Amazon founder. And on the other hand, we have SpaceX, founded by Elon Musk, founder of Tesla and some other companies. And both have been founded at around the same time. And it's quite interesting that they've developed very differently in the past couple of years. Both have vision statements. And it should be very easy to write a powerful vision statement for a space company, because after all, that's so great to go into space. You have so many things you can show, so many great pictures to share. And the vision statement for Blue Origin is for the benefit of Earth. So Blue Origin pretty much looks at the Earth. Blue Origin is also the name for Earth as our home. And they want to help to protect and preserve our home. And SpaceX looks out to the stars and they say, we want to make humanity multiplanetary. We want to go to Mars and beyond. We want to become a spacefaring civilization. And if you look at the business success and technological success over the past years, SpaceX is clearly in the lead. Like, they've reached orbit now many, many times. They've developed a reusable rocket. They are supplying space, the International Space Station now for many years. So SpaceX is much more successful than Blue Origin on that side of things. And another aspect here, if you look at the employee side of things, it's quite interesting to look at Glassdoor data. And what we see to compare three dimensions here is we have a pretty high approval of senior management at SpaceX compared to Blue Origin. We have, looking at work-life balance, a much better work-life balance for Blue Origin. And we have a very positive business outlook for SpaceX. And what's interesting in this setup is to say SpaceX seems to be a pretty challenging workplace, but for some reason they are able to create a vision and a purpose and an energy for their employees to really be behind their goals. And what I want to do now is to look into narrative maps to show you how we could compare both visions and maybe find a good explanation why one company is a bit more or even much more successful than the other one. So what's a narrative map and how can you create a narrative map for your audience? I didn't find a good way to actually map it out. And I wanted to find a methodology that's really easy to adopt and really easy to use for communicators and others in workshops, and really to map this out in a simple way. So what I've did now is have two dimensions. One dimension is the distribution of narratives. So there will be a few narratives which where just a few people will know them. Maybe it's narratives that only one person knows. And there are other narratives where everybody will know about them, right? That's the distribution side of things. The other side is a concept that's pretty important for narratives. It's the cultural embeddedness. This means how deep is the narrative embedded into a culture? Because some of the narratives are very old, hundreds or even thousands of years. A lot of what we see with religion, for instance, is deeply embedded into our culture. And along those two dimensions, we can now build 4 quadrants that kind of help us understand the narrative map. So number one is something I call emerging narratives. These are things that are happening right now. These are things that you find in the news, and these are things for space travel. To give you two examples here, one could be Silicon Valley best practices reinvent space travel. So it's pretty positive, a new kind of thinking into an old industry to make things cheaper, faster. And SpaceX is a great example of how this can be done. And another one is space travel is just another playground for the rich, because we have a widening income gap, and very, very few people in this world can actually afford to go to space. So a lot of people of us stand down here, look up and say, why only the rich now go to space? So that's emerging narratives. If you look to narratives which are deeply cultural embedded, that's something that's called master narratives. And for space travel, I brought you 3 examples here for powerful master narratives. One is the human drive to survive. We all know at some very further away day, sun will explode or an asteroid will come to Earth. So at some point, Earth will be in danger. And us as a species, humanity and everything else on Earth, we want to live to see the next day, the next year. And we want to make sure humanity survives. And going out to the stars means the probability to do this is just higher, and that's better. So that's a very powerful narrative in that regard. We have a powerful narrative around redemption. So from failure to success. Space travel is involved with a lot of risk, a lot of hazard, a lot of potential things that could go wrong. So a lot of things can go wrong. And if things work, if a rocket goes into space, it's such a great opportunity for celebration and such a great opportunity to tell stories about this. And the last one here is exploration as part of human DNA. Humans want to know what's behind the corner, what's behind the horizon. And space travel, as in an exploratory sense, is exactly doing that. The last 2 are more on the local level. We have local narratives that might be just relevant for specific types of jobs, specific types of communities, or even further down locally. For space travel, we could say there are specific states. Right now, it's specifically California and Florida, where a lot of the space industry is actually coming down. And it's a very attractive industry. It's manufacturing, it's high-tech jobs. So locally, it's very positive whenever you are able to secure these space companies in your state. That's a great thing to do. Last thing, locally, even further embedded is something we call local identity. And this can be deeply embedded things in our personality, based on our childhood, based how we were raised, based how the culture we grew up in. And for the space industry, you could say a lot of people in the space industry that are working there are highly driven people, growth mindset, and for them, this industry is very attractive. So I hope this gives you a rough idea. Like, there could be a lot more narratives here. Finally, let's talk about 3 ideas about transforming communications with the power of narratives. And I really want to run through them as very quick examples. In the book, there are like a lot more ideas how to do that, but just to give you an idea where it could go. Number 1 is strategic communications from storyteller to narrative creator. We see at our customers, in many cases, communications thinks about itself as the storytellers of the company, and they are on the lookout for interesting stories all the time, but they take these stories and take them as individual pieces and talk about them. And no matter how great you are as a storyteller, this approach has a limited impact. It's much more impactful to think it from the other direction and say, what about the reputation of this company? And what are some of the few key narratives that we want to influence and that we want to drive? And once you define these key narratives, you can then look for the stories that actually help you fuel this narrative and bring it to life. That's an entirely different approach, much more strategic. And specifically, if you're thinking about getting the seat at the table, the famous seat at the table that we're all talking about, being more strategic, that could be a very, very good approach to do that. Second one, drive change by finding common ground on the narrative map. And I think that's a very important point in days like today, where we have a lot of polarization. We have a lot of issues where you have two groups standing opposite each other and not finding common ground. And once you understand the concept of a narrative map, you will often find that once you move into the more deeply embedded cultural narratives, it's more the land of the local identity and specifically master narratives, you will be able to find common ground. Because after all, no matter how different our opinions are, we were raised in the same way. And many people say basic values like family, like independence, like being safe and have your family protected, like being free of with your decisions, like hard work is rewarded. Many of us can agree on these things. So the more you find common ground on a narrative map, you can lead with these shared values in your issues. One example is a lot about the communication of renewable energy or green energy projects that usually tries to put this green energy aspect in the core of the argumentation. But that's pretty controversial for many people. And it was much more successful to think about and talk about the independence and local decision-making that these green energies allow, because wind power, wind energy, and solar energy are all things that can be deployed locally. And for instance, a lot of farmers in the US and the Midwest now earn a bit of money for allowing wind energy to be on their fields. And it creates for them specifically independence. So think about this. It's also a good approach for things internally. If you have change projects, find common ground on the narrative map. Finally, there are a lot more opportunities to resonate with your audience if you think about it from a narrative perspective. Because today, if you have your core messages, many of us have a one voice program, and your core statements, you're trying to repeat the same thing again and again and again. This might create one core message, but it's sort of like not very engaging for an audience. With a narrative, you can think about it in a much wider and more engaging way. And I want to give you 3 examples. One is news checking. So what's happening in the news, maybe also internally, that is interesting. And here's an example from EasyJet, a airline. They had a flight where they didn't have the backrest of the seat for some reason, and they forced passengers to still fly. And ASOS, an apparel company, used this as a news checking and said, hey, if you fly like this, you should have a really nice dress to really make this a cool experience. So there are a lot of all these examples around where you can use news checking to use these opportunities, but you will only be able to do this if you think more broadly about your communications, and narratives will help you with to do that. A second one, which is more longer term, is agenda surfing. So that's topics you know that are coming up. Barbie movie is one example. There were over 100 brand partnerships, official and unofficial partnerships. And these partnerships could be done from many different companies, and you will be able to utilize them and see them much better if you think in a broader sense of narratives in that way. And the last one is interaction. Interaction means all the small and big pieces that are happening day by day, interaction with your customers or your employees, are opportunities to drive home your core narratives. And one right now, I guess most of you knows anyway, like very famous example is from Stanley, where a woman, her car burned out, and she left the car, left her Stanley tumbler inside. And afterwards, live on TikTok, she took out the tumbler and showed like there's still iced coffee in there, and the ice cubes were still cold in there. So that was amazing, and Stanley responded in a very good way. Terence Riley, the CEO of Stanley, said, "Great, we are so lucky. We are happy you're safe. We love you, and here's a new tumbler, and here's a new car for you." So fantastic case study how you can use narratives to be closer to your audience and create resonance. Finally, we are very excited about the power of narratives, and what we will do on our platform is make sure we build it into a lot of the things we offer. It just starts with allowing to think beyond individual news stories into campaigns, and also measure campaigns in a more effective way. The second thing is support the measurement of narratives with very easy surveys that you can embed into news and other things that you can also embed time and time again, and show over time how a narrative develops and how you're influencing the mind of your audience. And finally, narratives are ideally an ideal match to what we see in the AI revolution right now. Large language models like ChatGPT are very good at understanding narratives and also extracting narratives. And what we found, because we now have the narrative map that I talked about, we can teach AI a lot more about the audience and what the audience expects and wants. And with that, we can help you in a much better way to anticipate how your audience will react to your communication and all your messaging. And we think that's very exciting. And I think we are just at the start of things there to come. Thank you very much for the attention. We are very excited about the topic, and yeah, thanks very much.
Another one.
That was amazing. I love how Frank said that the job description for internal communicators is to change hearts and minds, and I couldn't agree more.